Hello everyone. Before we begin, this is a fictional story created for entertainment and is not legal or financial advice. Stay until the end, because this is not simply a story about betrayal. It is about the moment a woman stopped protecting the man who had broken her trust and began protecting the child who would depend on her strength. Subscribe to the channel if you believe accountability and compassion can exist in the same story. Now listen closely, because sometimes the quietest sound is the one that ends a marriage forever. The wedding ring struck the side of the crystal whiskey glass with a delicate metallic chime. Ryan Holloway froze. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The Manhattan skyline shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, thousands of lights reflecting across the glass walls of the penthouse that magazines had once called the city's most enviable home. Expensive artwork decorated the silent room. A candle at the center of the dining table had nearly burned itself out beside two untouched anniversary dinners that had long since gone cold. Ryan loosened his tie as though nothing unusual had happened. Evelyn. His voice searched for an excuse before his mind had even found one. Evelyn Carter remained seated, one hand resting gently against the curve of her 7-month pregnancy. The soft ivory dress she wore flowed elegantly around her, untouched by the storm that had quietly settled inside the room. Her long golden hair framed a face that carried neither tears nor anger, only certainty. She slowly pushed the whiskey glass toward him. The ring rested beneath the amber liquid like something that had already sunk beyond saving. "I thought you'd want it back," she said calmly. Ryan looked from the glass to her face. "What is this supposed to mean?" She tilted her head slightly. "It means I finally stopped pretending." Silence settled between them once again. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Ryan forced a laugh that sounded unfamiliar even to himself. "If this is about tonight, I already told you the investors wanted another meeting." Evelyn's blue eyes never left his. "Did the meeting also reserve a suite overlooking Central Park?" His smile disappeared. For the first time that evening, genuine surprise crossed his face. She already knew. Not a suspicion, not a rumor. The truth. Ryan slowly placed his car keys onto the marble countertop. "You've misunderstood." Evelyn looked toward the elegant dining table. The anniversary cake still waited untouched beneath its glass cover. A small silver plaque read, "Forever begins today." She almost smiled at the cruel irony. "I spent 3 hours watching the candles burn down," she said softly. "I kept thinking traffic must be terrible." Ryan opened his mouth. She gently raised one finger. "No." The single word stopped him more effectively than any scream ever could. "You've had enough opportunities to explain." She reached for a slim leather folder resting beside her chair. She did not open it. Not yet. Instead, she looked around the home they had built together. Every painting, every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen detail carried a memory that suddenly felt borrowed. Ryan noticed the folder. His heartbeat quickened. "What's inside?" Evelyn answered without emotion. "Everything I should have looked at much sooner." He tried taking a step closer. She stood before he could. Although visibly pregnant, she carried herself with remarkable grace, protecting the life growing inside her while refusing to carry the weight of another lie. "I used to believe trust disappeared all at once," she said quietly. "I was wrong." Ryan frowned. "It disappears one decision at a time." The words landed harder than any accusation. The whiskey remained untouched. The ring still rested beneath its surface. Neither of them reached for it. Beyond the rain-covered windows, the city continued moving as though nothing had changed. Inside the penthouse, however, an empire built on admiration had just encountered its first honest reckoning. And neither Ryan nor Evelyn yet understood that the wedding ring lying at the bottom of that crystal glass was only the first thing about to sink. Morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse, but it brought no warmth. Ryan Holloway barely slept. The crystal whiskey glass still rested exactly where Evelyn had left it. The wedding ring remained beneath the amber liquid, untouched, almost mocking him with its silent presence. He stared at it for several long seconds before reaching for his phone. No messages from Evelyn. No accusations. No dramatic farewell. Only silence. For reasons he couldn't explain, that frightened him far more than anger ever could. He found her standing inside the nursery. Soft, cream-colored walls surrounded the unfinished room. A white rocking chair sat beside the window, while tiny folded baby clothes rested neatly inside open drawers. Evelyn gently arranged a stack of blankets, her movements slow and careful, one hand instinctively supporting the life growing inside her. "You should have eaten breakfast," Ryan said quietly. "I wasn't hungry. You need to take care of yourself." She continued, folding a small blanket before answering. "I am." The conversation died almost as quickly as it had begun. Ryan stepped closer. "Evelyn, we can fix this." She finally looked at him. "I've noticed something about broken things." "What?" "They're never repaired by pretending they never broke." Ryan lowered his eyes. "I made a mistake." She studied his face, searching for the man she had once believed could never betray her. "One mistake?" she asked gently. The question lingered in the room. Ryan couldn't answer. Evelyn walked toward the hallway, stopping beside an elegant oak cabinet built into the wall. She unlocked a hidden drawer and removed a slim black storage box. Ryan frowned. "I've never seen that before." "I know." She carried it to the dining table and carefully placed it between them. She opened the lid. Inside were neatly labeled envelopes containing hotel receipts, flight confirmations, restaurant reservations, photographs sent to her by people who recognized Ryan, and statements from accounts on which Evelyn was a lawful joint holder. She had not guessed passwords, entered private devices, planted tracking software, or secretly intercepted conversations. Samuel had repeatedly warned her that pain did not excuse unlawful evidence gathering. Everything in the box had come from records she was entitled to receive or information voluntarily provided to her. Nothing was scattered. Nothing looked emotional. Everything had been organized with quiet precision. Ryan felt the color drain from his face. "You've been collecting this?" "For almost 2 years." His breathing slowed. "No. I kept hoping each folder would be the last one." She picked up a photograph taken in the lobby of a hotel where Ryan had claimed to be attending a supplier meeting. Neither of them needed to study it. Ryan already knew what it showed. "I told myself there had to be another explanation," Evelyn said. "I defended you even when you weren't in the room." Ryan closed his eyes. "Evelyn, I lied to my family." She selected another envelope. "I lied to our friends." Another. "I even lied to myself." The nursery remained visible through the open doorway. A tiny wooden cradle waited quietly for a child who knew nothing about betrayal. Ryan reached toward the box. She calmly closed the lid before his fingers touched it. "Not yet. What are you planning?" "I'm planning to stop carrying your secrets." He stared at her. "You want a divorce?" Evelyn rested both hands gently over her stomach. "I want peace." Outside, the city continued rushing through another ordinary workday. Inside the penthouse, years of hidden truths had finally found daylight. Ryan realized something that unsettled him more than the evidence itself. The woman standing before him was no longer waiting for answers. She had already accepted them. And somewhere beyond the walls of the home they once shared, consequences had quietly begun moving toward him. Steady, patient, and impossible to outrun. Some truths are buried so deeply that even the people who live them forget where they began. Ryan Holloway arrived at headquarters earlier than usual. The 48th floor buzzed with its ordinary rhythm. Assistants hurried between offices, elevator doors opened and closed, and digital screens displayed the company's latest market performance. To everyone else, it was another successful Monday. To Ryan, it felt like standing inside a building whose foundation had quietly begun to crack. His assistant placed a folder on his desk. These came from the secretary of the board. The independent directors authorized a review of the company's original financing after receiving a written request from the holder of the emergency trust's voting rights. Ryan frowned. "Who made the request?" "The notice does not identify the holder. Outside counsel is handling it." When she left, he opened the folder. Inside were copies of contracts dating back almost a decade. Investment agreements. Emergency funding approvals. Private trust documents. His eyes stopped on a familiar date. The week his company had nearly collapsed. The memory returned with startling clarity. 10 years earlier, Holloway Technologies had been only days away from bankruptcy. Investors had withdrawn. Payroll was impossible to meet. Every bank had refused another extension. Ryan remembered sitting alone in a tiny conference room, convinced everything he had built was over. Then, almost overnight, an anonymous private trust had invested enough capital to keep the company alive. The identity of the investor had never been disclosed. Ryan had spent years believing luck had finally chosen his side. Now the documents raised an uncomfortable question. Who had really saved him? Across the city, Evelyn sat inside a quiet office belonging to Samuel Bennett, the family's longtime attorney. Sunlight filtered through tall windows lined with shelves of leather-bound legal volumes. Samuel carefully removed another document from an archive box. I've kept every original copy exactly as you instructed. Evelyn accepted the folder without speaking. Inside rested the trust agreement she had signed years before. At 24 years old, she had inherited a substantial family fortune after her grandfather's passing. Most people expected her to expand the family's investments. Instead, she had quietly transferred nearly half of her inheritance into a confidential trust. Its only purpose had been to rescue Ryan's failing dream. No interviews, no recognition, no ownership announcement. Only one condition. Her identity would remain permanently confidential. Samuel adjusted his glasses. You never told him. Evelyn smiled faintly. I wanted him to succeed because he earned it. And now, she looked down at the familiar signature bearing her younger handwriting. I wanted a husband. Her voice softened. Not someone who spent years thanking strangers for a miracle I created. Samuel nodded slowly. There are still legal protections attached to that agreement. I know. If necessary. She gently closed the folder. Not yet. Back inside the executive tower, Ryan continued reading. Several pages referenced confidential voting rights held by the original emergency trust. He had never paid attention to the fine print. At the time, survival had mattered more than details. Now every overlooked clause seemed unusually significant. His office door opened. Daniel Mercer, the company's chief operating officer, entered with a concerned expression. The auditors want another meeting tomorrow. Ryan rubbed his forehead. What changed? They're asking questions about decisions made years ago. How many years? Daniel hesitated. The beginning. Ryan slowly leaned back in his chair. For the first time in a decade, the past was no longer history. It was becoming evidence. Across the city, Evelyn carefully returned the documents to their box before placing one hand over her unborn son. She wasn't preparing for revenge. She was preparing for the moment when the truth would no longer need her protection. And somewhere between forgotten contracts, silent sacrifices, and promises made years before, the future of Ryan Holloway's empire had already begun to change. Pressure rarely announces itself with a single dramatic moment. More often, it arrives disguised as ordinary questions no one can comfortably answer. By Tuesday morning, Ryan Holloway's calendar looked unusually crowded. Meetings with outside auditors, a conference call with the company's largest lender, a private session with the legal department. Nothing about the schedule appeared alarming to anyone walking through Holloway Technologies' polished headquarters. Employees greeted one another with their usual confidence, unaware that beneath the company's impressive reputation, uncertainty had begun spreading quietly from office to office. Ryan entered the executive conference room carrying only a tablet and a cup of black coffee. 5 auditors were already waiting. One of them slid a document across the table. We're reviewing several historical transactions connected to the company's early expansion. Ryan glanced at the first page. I thought those reviews were completed years ago. They were. The senior auditor folded his hands calmly. But new documentation requires us to verify several approvals. Ryan continued reading. Emergency capital allocation, executive reimbursement, consulting agreements. Most of the transactions were legitimate. A handful, however, required explanations he had never expected to give. When do you need these answers? Ryan asked. Immediately. The room became unusually quiet. Across town, Evelyn Carter sat inside a peaceful riverside cafe, far removed from corporate boardrooms and financial reports. She watched people hurry along the sidewalk while a cup of untouched tea cooled in front of her. Samuel Bennett joined her a few moments later. He carried another leather portfolio. They've started asking questions, he said. Evelyn nodded. I assumed they would. Samuel lowered his voice. Your trust agreement is attracting attention. It was always going to. He opened the portfolio. Inside rested certified copies of the emergency investment and the voting rights provisions attached to it. The confidentiality clause is still valid, Samuel explained. No one can release your identity without your permission. But the trust may request an independent audit when corporate assets or disclosure controls appear at risk. Evelyn looked at the papers, but made no move to touch them. I authorized the audit, not a campaign against Ryan. That distinction is in the written request, Samuel said. The committee controls the investigation. You will not choose the auditors, direct their conclusions, or receive private board materials merely because you funded the company years ago. Evelyn looked through the cafe window toward the busy street. For years I protected Ryan's confidence because I believed we were protecting our future. Samuel remained silent. Now I am protecting the company, its employees, and the child who will inherit the consequences of our choices. Back at headquarters, another unexpected problem surfaced. Daniel Mercer entered Ryan's office carrying a stack of printed reports. Our banking partners are requesting additional financial disclosures. Ryan frowned. That's unusual. So is this. Daniel pointed toward one highlighted transaction. Several executive expenses had been routed through corporate accounts during overseas business trips. Most appeared routine. Others looked increasingly difficult to justify. Ryan slowly removed his glasses. Who asked them to review these? Daniel hesitated. We don't know. For the first time since founding the company, Ryan felt something unfamiliar settling over him. Not panic, not guilt, uncertainty. He had always believed he controlled every important decision. Now invisible forces seemed to be moving independently of him. Late that afternoon, Evelyn returned to the penthouse. She paused briefly inside the nursery before gently placing one hand against the wooden crib. The room remained peaceful. The child she carried still knew nothing about headlines, board meetings, or broken promises. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You deserve a home built on honesty." For the first time since confronting Ryan, her control broke. Evelyn lowered herself into the rocking chair and cried into both hands, not because she doubted what he had done, but because leaving still hurt. She remembered the young man who once carried second-hand desks up 4 flights of stairs, the husband who learned her grandfather's favorite songs, and the father she had imagined beside the crib. Strength did not erase grief. It only kept grief from making every decision. When the tears passed, she called her mother and told the truth without polishing it. "I stayed because I loved him," Evelyn said. "I am leaving because I have to love myself and this baby, too." Her mother did not offer revenge or instructions. She simply answered, "Come home whenever you need to." Evelyn breathed more easily after that. For once, she did not have to be the calmest person in the room. Her phone vibrated. A single message from Samuel appeared. "The board has scheduled an extraordinary review." No further explanation was necessary. Evelyn locked the screen and quietly slipped the phone into her handbag. Outside, another storm gathered over Manhattan. Inside the city's tallest offices, questions were multiplying faster than answers. And somewhere between forgotten contracts, unexplained transactions, and carefully guarded secrets, Ryan Holloway's carefully constructed empire had begun shifting beneath his feet, one quiet revelation at a time. The truth rarely needs to raise its voice. Once it begins to surface, silence does the rest. The Monday board meeting began precisely at 9 o'clock. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline as 12 directors took their seats around the polished walnut conference table. No reporters were present. No employees waited outside. Only the company's senior leadership, legal advisors, and independent auditors occupied the room. Ryan Holloway entered with his usual confidence, but even he noticed the atmosphere had changed. Conversation stopped the moment he sat down. The chairman cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming, everyone." He looked toward the lead auditor. "You may begin." Without unnecessary ceremony, the auditor activated a large presentation screen. The first slide displayed a simple timeline covering the previous 3 years. Business travel, corporate expenses, executive reimbursements. Nothing appeared extraordinary until another column slowly appeared beside it. Private travel records, hotel reservations, personal entertainment expenses. The matching dates immediately drew attention. Ryan leaned forward. "What exactly are we looking at?" The auditor answered calmly. "A comparison between company-funded travel and privately documented activities." Another slide appeared. Several expenses approved as executive business development had occurred during weekends with no scheduled corporate meetings. One director quietly removed his glasses. Another folded his arms without speaking. The room grew noticeably colder. Ryan turned toward Daniel Mercer. "You've seen this?" Daniel hesitated before answering. This morning, the auditor continued. No conclusions have been reached. He paused deliberately, but several expenditures require clarification. Ryan forced himself to remain composed. I'll provide whatever documentation you need. We appreciate that. Then another screen appeared. This time, it summarized non-financial records obtained through company systems and ordinary business channels, building access logs, corporate car records, calendar entries, travel authorizations, and written confirmations from hotels and vendors. No secretly intercepted calls appeared, and the board had not asked Evelyn to invade anyone's privacy. Each item independently seemed ordinary. Together, they created a chronology showing that several trips described as business development had no scheduled meetings and coincided with private stays. The company's legal counsel quietly spoke. Our responsibility is not to police a marriage. It is to determine whether corporate resources were used appropriately and whether required disclosures were complete. No one interrupted. Across the table, several longtime directors exchanged uneasy glances. Many had admired Ryan for years. Now they found themselves questioning decisions they had once accepted without hesitation. Meanwhile, across the city, Evelyn Carter visited the charitable foundation she had quietly supported for nearly a decade. Children laughed in the courtyard outside, while volunteers organized food packages for struggling families. The executive director welcomed her warmly. We've missed seeing you. Evelyn smiled. I've simply been preparing for a different chapter. She walked through the community center at an unhurried pace. No one there cared about stock prices. No one asked about corporate investigations. The conversations centered on newborn supplies, school scholarships, and families rebuilding their lives. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt completely at peace. Her phone vibrated. One brief message appeared from Samuel Bennett. The board has requested additional legal documents. She quietly placed the phone back into her purse. The truth no longer belonged only to her. It had begun finding its own path. Back inside the boardroom, the chairman finally spoke. This review isn't about public relations. His voice remained steady. It's about governance. Ryan slowly looked around the table. No one appeared angry. That realization unsettled him more than outrage would have. They looked disappointed. Years of trust had not disappeared because of one dramatic revelation. They had eroded through countless quiet choices. As the meeting adjourned, directors left without their usual conversations. Ryan remained seated alone. Outside the conference room, employees continued another ordinary workday, unaware that the future of the company had quietly shifted. The empire still stood. Its name remained on the building. Its offices remained full. But for the first time since Ryan Holloway founded the company, authority no longer rested on confidence alone. It now rested on whether the truth could withstand the light. Reputation is built over years, but sometimes it changes in a single afternoon. The special board meeting resumed 48 hours later. This time, the atmosphere inside Holloway Technologies' executive conference room felt different. The tension was no longer fueled by uncertainty. Most of the facts had already been verified. The directors had spent 2 days reviewing financial records, interviewing outside advisors, and examining every document presented by the independent auditors. Ryan Holloway entered without speaking. For the first time since founding the company, he chose a seat without standing at the head of the table. The chairman acknowledged him with a quiet nod. Thank you for returning. Ryan simply replied, let's begin. The legal counsel distributed sealed envelopes to every director. Ryan and his attorney had received the same report the previous evening and had been given an opportunity to submit corrections. Inside was a summary of the investigation's findings. No fraud had been established. No criminal conduct had been alleged, and the board made no judgment about Ryan's private relationship beyond the way it intersected with company expenses. But the report described repeated failures in executive judgment, inadequate disclosure of personal costs connected to corporate travel, and governance practices that no longer reflected the standards expected by the board. The chairman folded his copy. Our responsibility is to protect this company, its employees, and its shareholders. Today's decision concerns the Office of Chief Executive. Your position as a director is governed separately by the charter, bylaws, and stockholder rights. Ryan nodded. He understood the distinction. No one objected. With a quorum present and the minutes being recorded by the corporate secretary, a vote was called. One by one, Each director marked a confidential ballot. The room remained almost silent except for the faint sound of pens touching paper. Minutes later, the corporate secretary counted the results. The chairman looked directly at Ryan. Effective immediately, the board has voted to place you on administrative leave while governance reforms are completed. The words settled heavily over the room. Ryan closed his eyes for a brief moment. He had prepared himself for criticism. He had not prepared himself to surrender the office he had built from nothing. No dramatic argument followed. No raised voices. Only the quiet finality of corporate accountability. As the meeting concluded, several directors approached Ryan individually. None of them expressed anger. Instead, they offered restrained disappointment. "We hope you find your way back," one senior director said. Ryan nodded without answering. Outside the headquarters, employees noticed unfamiliar activity. Senior executives entered and left conference rooms carrying confidential files. News had not reached the public, but rumors spread quickly through every department. Inside his office, Ryan slowly removed family photographs from his desk. One picture caught his attention. It showed Evelyn smiling beside him at the groundbreaking ceremony for the company's first headquarters. Neither of them looked wealthy. Neither of them looked important. They simply looked happy. He realized he had spent years chasing greater success, while slowly walking away from the person who had celebrated his smallest victories. Across the city, Evelyn attended a prenatal appointment. The doctor smiled after completing the examination. "Your son is healthy." Relief softened Evelyn's expression. She listened carefully as the baby's heartbeat filled the quiet room. Strong, steady, full of promise. For several peaceful moments, the outside world disappeared. No board meetings, no investigations, no painful memories. Only the simple reminder that life continued moving forward. When the appointment ended, Samuel Bennett met her in the hospital lobby. "It's official," he said gently. "The board acted this morning." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I never wanted this." "I know. You also never caused it." They walked toward the exit beneath the warm afternoon sunlight. For the first time in many months, Evelyn felt that she was no longer carrying the weight of someone else's decisions. Behind her, an old chapter was quietly closing. Ahead of her, another waited to begin. And somewhere high above the Manhattan skyline, a corner office stood empty, not because success had disappeared, but because trust had become more valuable than power. And once that trust was lost, even the tallest office could no longer feel like home. Sometimes the beginning of a new life arrives at the exact moment an old one quietly comes to an end. Autumn sunlight filtered through the hospital windows as Evelyn Carter took a slow breath. The delivery room was calm. Monitors beeped steadily while nurses moved with practiced confidence. Outside the door, family members waited in quiet anticipation, but inside, everything narrowed to a single moment. One final push. Then the room filled with the unmistakable cry of a newborn child. Evelyn closed her eyes as tears slipped gently down her cheeks. "Congratulations," the doctor said with a warm smile. "You have a healthy baby boy." The nurse carefully placed the infant into Evelyn's arms. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. His tiny fingers wrapped instinctively around hers. His breathing was soft. His face completely peaceful. None of the pain that had shaped the previous months existed in his world. He knew nothing about broken promises, nothing about board meetings, nothing about betrayal. He only knew the comforting heartbeat of the woman holding him. "Hello, little one," Evelyn whispered. "I've been waiting for you." Across the city, Ryan Holloway sat alone inside his apartment. The once busy executive calendar on his desk had become almost empty. Several responsibilities had been reassigned during the company's leadership transition. His temporary leave continued while governance reforms progressed under the board's supervision. For the first time in years, silence occupied more hours than meetings. His phone vibrated. A single message appeared from Samuel Bennett. "Mother and baby are healthy." Ryan stared at the screen for several minutes. He smiled faintly before placing the phone back on the table. Relief came first. Regret followed immediately afterward. At the hospital, visitors quietly arrived throughout the afternoon. Evelyn's parents embraced her with joyful tears. Friends brought flowers. Volunteers from the community foundation delivered a handmade blanket stitched by local mothers she had helped over the years. One small card rested on top. "Because you never stop believing in families." Evelyn gently traced the handwritten words with her fingertips. Several weeks later, the Carter Family Foundation officially announced a new initiative. Its mission was simple: provide emergency housing, financial education, childcare assistance, and legal support for single mothers rebuilding their lives after unexpected hardship. No grand ceremony accompanied the announcement. No dramatic press conference. Only a modest gathering inside the same community center Evelyn had quietly supported for years. The executive director invited her to speak. She stepped to the podium, holding only a few handwritten notes. "I've learned that strength doesn't always look loud," she said. "Sometimes it looks like choosing kindness after disappointment." The audience listened in complete silence. "Sometimes it looks like beginning again." Warm applause filled the room. Not because her words were extraordinary, because everyone present knew they were genuine. That evening, Evelyn returned home carrying her sleeping son. The nursery that had once witnessed uncertainty now echoed with gentle lullabies. She carefully placed him into the wooden crib and watched him sleep. Outside, the city lights shimmered beneath the evening sky just as they had months before. Yet everything felt different. She no longer measured success by wealth, titles, or admiration. She measured it by peace. Across Manhattan, Ryan stood beside the window of his apartment looking toward the skyline they once shared. Somewhere beyond those lights, his son had begun a new life. And although he could not rewrite yesterday, he finally understood something success had never taught him. The greatest legacy a parent leaves behind is not an empire built in glass and steel. It is the character a child learns by watching the adults who choose dignity over resentment, hope over bitterness, and truth over convenience. Some endings are not marked by applause. They arrive quietly, when peace finally becomes stronger than pain. During the months after William's birth, Evelyn and Ryan completed a private divorce without public accusations. Their attorneys separated marital property, preserved the trust's corporate rights, and created a parenting plan based on William's health and stability. Ryan received regular medical updates, completed a parenting course he chose on his own, and followed every scheduled visit. He did not use money to pressure Evelyn, and she did not use access to their son as punishment. Forgiveness remained a personal question. Co-parenting was a responsibility. 6 months passed. Winter gradually surrendered to spring, and Manhattan awakened beneath clear blue skies. Trees along the avenues blossomed once more, reminding everyone that seasons always move forward, whether people are ready or not. So do lives. Inside a sunlit townhouse overlooking a small neighborhood park, Evelyn Carter stood by the nursery window, gently rocking her son to sleep. William had inherited her bright blue eyes. Every morning began with the same peaceful routine. A warm bottle, soft laughter, a walk beneath flowering trees, evenings filled with bedtime stories and quiet music. The enormous penthouse, the corporate galas, and the endless executive dinners now felt like memories from another lifetime. She no longer measured her days by board meetings or headlines. She measured them by first smiles, tiny hands reaching toward hers, and the quiet certainty that her son would grow up surrounded by honesty. Downstairs, volunteers from the Carter Family Foundation prepared for another weekend program, supporting young mothers beginning new chapters of their own. The foundation had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. Housing assistance, career mentoring, emergency childcare, scholarship programs. Everything Evelyn once wished had existed for women facing uncertain futures had gradually become reality. She rarely appeared in newspapers. She preferred watching families rebuild their lives instead. Across the city, Ryan Holloway followed a different routine. After months away from executive leadership, he had accepted a non-executive advisory role during the company's restructuring. The board welcomed his experience, but maintained the governance reforms that had restored confidence among employees and investors. The title on his office door had changed, so had the man behind it. One quiet Saturday afternoon, Samuel Bennett called him. Evelyn confirmed that today's scheduled visit can take place at the foundation garden. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. "I'll be there." An hour later, he arrived carrying a small wrapped book for William. No photographers waited outside. No reporters followed him. Only children playing in the courtyard and volunteers planting spring flowers filled the peaceful afternoon. Evelyn greeted him with a polite smile. The anger had cooled, but the boundaries remained clear. They were not pretending the marriage could be restored by one apology. They were learning how two adults could protect a child without rewriting the truth. Ryan looked down as William reached curiously toward him from Evelyn's arms. "May I?" She nodded. Carefully, Ryan held his son for the very first time. The baby studied his face with innocent curiosity before wrapping one tiny hand around his father's finger. Ryan felt his throat tighten. He whispered almost instinctively, "I'm sorry." Then he looked at Evelyn. "Not because I lost the office. Not because people found out. I am sorry because you gave me trust, and I treated it as if it would renew itself forever." The apology was not offered to change the past. It could not. Evelyn watched quietly. "I believe you understand more than you did," she said. "That is not the same as restoring our marriage." Ryan nodded. "I know. Some wounds never disappear completely. Forgiveness does not always require reunion, and responsible co-parenting does not erase betrayal. Sometimes healing simply means refusing to let yesterday control every decision made tomorrow." After a few peaceful minutes, Ryan returned William to his mother. "Thank you," he said softly. Evelyn smiled. "Take care of yourself." He nodded once before walking slowly toward the gate. Halfway down the path, he looked back. Evelyn stood beneath the warm spring sunlight holding their son, surrounded by laughter, blooming flowers, and people whose lives had become brighter because she had chosen compassion instead of bitterness. Ryan understood something he had once been too ambitious to see. Success built companies. Character built families. As he disappeared beyond the garden entrance, Evelyn kissed William's forehead and continued toward the foundation building without looking back. The future no longer waited for justice to arrive. It had already been built. One honest choice, one quiet act of kindness, and one peaceful new beginning at a time.